Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Jadi kita sambung kuliah kita secara online, kuliah LMCR 2312 Asas Pengurusan Kualiti. Tajuk kuliah pada hari ini ialah berkaitan dengan teknik penyelesaian masalah, bahagian yang ketiga, ya. Jadi untuk bahagian yang ketiga kita bincang tentang carta turus, ya, ataupun dalam bahasa Inggerisnya ialah bar chart, ya. Okey, yang pertama, carta turus digunakan untuk mengetahui kepentingan yang ditunjukkan melalui kekerapan oleh sebab ataupun masalah. Okey. Okey, kemudian ada contoh yang ditunjukkan tentang carta turus. Contohnya ialah berkaitan dengan bilangan aduan yang diterima dan juga jenis aduan, ya. Okey, di mana skill yang menegak tu menunjukkan kuantiti, berapa bilangan aduan, ya. Alright, okey. Okey, carta turus ini tidak perlu dilukiskan dengan sepenuhnya jika terdapat angka-angka yang besar, memadai menunjukkan keratan saja, ya. Alright, jadi kita tengok, ya. Alright, so ni, ya. Okey, so saya nak beritahu, jadi kita belum pergi lagi pada ni kan, histogram, ya. Histogram, kita cuma bincang carta turus ataupun bar chart. Jadi apa beza dia? Jadi bezanya ialah ni, kita nampak ni kan, sebab ramai orang confused. Sebab nampak ni je kan, apa ni, yang menegak ni, macam ni. Jadi dia ingat sama je, sebenarnya lain, ya. Jadi ini adalah bar chart, carta turus, kan. So carta turus sini, lepas tu dia terpisah antara yang pertama, yang kedua, yang ketiga, yang keempat, yang kelima. So ini adalah apa ni? Okay, untuk China 90, untuk US banyak ni, dan dia ada gap, ya. Seolah-olah macam tiang-tiang, sini. Sementara histogram ni dia tidak ada gap, ya. Dia ada macam ada inilah continuation 30, 50, 80 dan sebagainya, ya. Tapi dia tidak ada gap di antaranya. Jadi sekarang ni kita belajar tentang ini, iaitu tentang bar chart, ya. Jadi yang ni kena ingat, ya. Alright. Okey, sekarang ni kita tengok, ya, bagaimana untuk kita create bar graphs, ya. Okey, jadi kita sama-sama tengok.
Creating bar graphs. Suppose we decide to collect data about the number of students in this class who go to school by bike, bus, car, or on foot. It is useful to organize the data in a table first. In the first column, we indicate how students come to school. In the second column, we write the count, using numbers or tally marks. Students who take their bikes, raise your hands. So 5 of you take their bikes to school. How many take the bus? 8. How many come by car? 3. And how many of you walk to school? 9 students. Excellent. One way to represent this count data is to draw a bar graph. But what is a bar graph? Let's use a grid and label our categories. And let's say that coloring one square would represent a count of 1. We put this information to the side of the graph. We have 5 students who take their bikes to school. So on top of the bike category, we color the first square, and another right above it, and another, and so on until we've colored 5 squares. Notice how all colored squares combined make a long bar. Moving on to the next category, there are 8 students who take the bus to school. So on top of the bus category, we color 8 squares. And there are 3 students who come by car. So on top of the car category, we color 3 squares. Finally, there are 9 who walk to school. So on top of the walk category, we color 9 squares. And our bar graph is finished. In this lesson, you learned how to draw a simple bar graph.
Okey ya, so begitu mudah sekali untuk kita membina bar graph ataupun bar chart ya. Alright, kita pergi pada tajuk yang seterusnya iaitu carta bulatan ya. Okey, carta bulatan dikenali juga dengan nama pie chart. Digunakan untuk membandingkan satu kuantiti dengan kuantiti yang lain. Mudah untuk membandingkan tiap-tiap data dengan jumlahnya sekali ya. Okey, so apa langkah dia? Langkah yang pertama ialah data ditukar kepada peratusan. So data yang kita ambil itu kita tukar dalam bentuk peratusan dan seterusnya kepada darjah ya. Okey, langkah yang kedua, 2 bulatan kecil dan juga yang besar dilukis untuk menunjukkan jumlah kuantiti unit berkenaan ya. Langkah ketiga, bulatan juga disediakan perlu dibahagikan mengikut sektor iaitu A hingga D berdasarkan peratus. Lukiskan sektor-sektor yang ada untuk menunjukkan bahagian A hingga D ya. Okey, langkah yang keempat, sektor ni disusun mengikut pusingan jam bermula daripada jam 12. Susunan dibuat mengikut yang mana terbesar ataupun yang terbanyak dahulu diikuti dengan yang lebih kecil. Carta ini mesti mempunyai maklumat seperti tarikh, tujuan dan sebagainya. Alright, so ini adalah contoh hasil dia. Okey. Okey, so ini adalah dalam bentuk peratus ya. How much water do we use? Alright, jadi sekarang ni saya akan bukakan langkah-langkah macam mana kita nak buat pie chart.
By now, we should be very comfortable making bar graphs to represent data. We have looked at normal bar graphs, joint bar graphs, subdivided bar graphs, and percentage bar graphs. But bar graphs are not the only way to present the data. Look at this example in which we can see different types of cars and their sales in a particular month. So in that month, 150 type A cars were sold, 100 type B cars, 80 type C cars, and 170 type D cars were sold. First, let us see how the bar graph for this data would look. 4 bars to represent the sales of 4 types of cars. An appropriate scale of 1 centimeter equal to 40 cars was chosen. We can see that car D was the best-selling model in that month, and lesser numbers of car C were sold. But is there any other way in which we can represent this data? Assuming that these were the only 4 types of cars sold, this is another way in which the data can be shown. It's a circle divided into 4 parts or sectors of not necessarily the same sizes. If all these regions are sectors, it means this point has to be the center. But what are these regions? They represent the 4 parts, sales of each, A, B, C, and D. Do not worry about how we drew this. We will see that soon. Just try to understand the logic first. Assume this entire circle represents the total number of car sales. These 4 sum up to 500. 500 cars were sold that month. This region A represents 30% of the total sales, which is 150 cars. How did we get this 30%? 150 divided by 500 multiplied by 100, and that's 30%. In the same way, B represents 20%, which is 100 cars. C represents 16%, which is 80 cars. And D represents 34%, that is 170 cars. 150 is 30% of 500. 100 is 20% of 500. 80 and 170 are 16 and 34% respectively. The region A covers 30% of the entire circle. Region B covers 20% of the entire circle. And regions C and D represent 16 and 34% of the entire circle. We use a circle to represent the total and make parts of it to represent each category. This type of representation is called a pie chart. And what's the best example of a pie chart? Yes, it's a pizza. It's a pie chart with equal parts or sectors. I was looking for some examples of pie charts, but then I thought I should make one myself. So I asked many people a question. What do you do while waiting for your toast to pop up? I drew a circle that represents the number of people I approached. Around 4% of the people told me that they get butter and cutlery out. 2% of the people told me that they clean up the kitchen. And you will not believe that the remaining 94% told me that they just stare at the toaster. Isn't that true with us too? A few people were asked to categorize the content of a pop song. A circle was drawn to represent the entire content. Around 2% was actual lyrics. 25% was the word yay. 30% was the word ooh. And the remaining was the word baby. This was just a funny way to understand pie charts. We will look at a couple of serious examples in our other videos.
Okay, jadi itu adalah cara-cara mudah, contoh-contoh yang sangat mudah bagaimana kita dapat membina pie chart. Okey, dan pada peringkat awal tu dia terangkan tentang bagaimana kita nak convert daripada bar chart kepada pie chart, dan pada bahagian yang kedua ialah contoh-contoh yang sangat mudah, apa perkara-perkara yang kita boleh lakukan untuk membina pie chart ini. Okey, sekarang kita tengok ni pula histogram ya. Okey, histogram. Histogram digunakan untuk mempersembahkan data dengan mudah dan berkesan. Dia menunjukkan kekerapan berlaku sebab-sebab yang telah dikenal pasti. Okey, dan kekerapan ni seperti juga dalam carta turus digambarkan melalui ketinggian sesuatu turus itu dalam histogram ya. Sebagai contoh, terdapat aduan dalam sebuah agensi kerajaan bahawa ada di antara pekerja datang lewat ke pejabat. Ya. Okey. Itu contoh dia. So, cara-cara menyediakan ialah seperti berikut. Yang pertama, tentukan bilangan kelas yang dikendaki. Yang kedua, tentukan selang kelas. Jadi anda nampak jadi ini beza dia. Sebab tu dia tidak terpisah. So dia ada continuation ya. So ada selang-selang kelas, ada masa dia ya. Yang ketiga, tentukan sempadan kelas untuk menyemak data. Okey, yang keempat, gunakan lembaran semakan untuk kutip data. Yang kelima, pindahkan maklumat daripada senarai semakan ke jadual kekerapan. Dan langkah yang keenam ialah melukiskan histogram. Ya. Jadi, okey, tak ada ni. Jadi kita tengok contoh ya. Tengok contoh, lepas kita tengok contoh baru kita faham dia punya penerangan. So saya akan buka video yang pertama.
Welcome to My Secret Math Tutor. In this example, we are going to make a histogram. Now, you may have heard of these before or maybe even seen them and said, hey, wait a minute, that thing looks like a bar graph. Well, histograms are a bar graph, but they're a very special type. They give us quantitative information. So they give us a lot about the distribution of the data and tell us basically how many are in each category. So for this example, I have a collection of different numbers, and we're going to create a histogram for this data. Now, one thing that you want to identify is the values that should go along the bottom and the values that should go along the side. Along the bottom, we put the values of our variables. So what things are we talking about? Well, it looks like we're talking about some 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, all that good stuff. So I will put that along the bottom. Perfect. Okay? Now, along the vertical bar, this is where we put our frequency. In other words, how many of these things do we have? Well, looking at all my data, looks like the smallest number of things is like maybe only one of them. And the maximum number of things I have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, 5 eighths, okay? So I want to make sure that my scale over here has enough to handle at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. There we go. So again, this represents frequency, and this represents the values of our variables. Okay, so let's start off. How many 7s do we have? Looks like we have 1, 2, 3. So in my 7 category, I will create a bar that goes up to 3. Just like that. When I get to my 8 category, I count up how many of them I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I make a bar that goes up to 5. And you can see how this process plays out for all the rest of the numbers. So when I get to the 9s, I only have 1 9. I get to the 10s, I have 3 of those. Get to the 11s, oh, I have 2 11s. Looks like 3 12s, and only 1 13. So now we've created the different bars for our histogram, and you can see which variable is the most frequent. It's basically the tallest bar. And there you go. For more videos, please visit mysecretmathtutor.com.
Kita tengok yang kedua pula, ya.
Hello, welcome to Moo Math, where we upload a new math video every day. In this video, I'd like to talk about the difference between a histogram and a bar graph. A histogram and a bar graph both are ways to graph data. Both have an X and a Y axis, and both use a bar to display the data. With a histogram, the categories are numerical. For example, notice in this histogram, the x-axis is the age of the people in the room. The ages are grouped in a numerical range. In this next example, the histogram is graphing the score on a test and the number of people who scored in each range. Also, the bars touch with a histogram. A bar graph uses categories such as the types of movies, color of eyes, and the bars do not touch. For example, with this bar graph, the categories are grade level and the number of student in each grade level. Notice that the bars do not touch. In another example, the categories are types of videos and the number of videos in each type. Again, notice the bars don't touch. In summary, histogram have bars that touch and use quantities. Bar graphs have bars that don't touch and use categorical data. Thanks for watching. Mumu Math uploads a new math video every day. Please subscribe and share.
Okey ya, video kedua menunjukkan perbezaan antara histogram dengan bar chart ya. So dia kata apa? Bar chart categorical, histogram berbentuk quantity ya. Categorical. Apa maksud categorical? Categorical ialah contohnya jantina. Lelaki berapa ramai, perempuan berapa ramai, ya. Okey, apa lagi? Contohnya ialah etnik, ya. Melayu, Cina, India, Kadazan, Iban, seberapa ramai setiap satu. Apa contoh lain lagi? Warna, ya. Warna kegemaran. Merah berapa ramai, biru berapa ramai, kuning berapa ramai, hijau berapa ramai. Jadi itu adalah contoh-contoh kategori. Okey, so yang keduanya ialah yang berbentuk kuantiti, ya. Itu maksudnya continuous data. Dalam video tu disebut sebagai kuantiti, ya. Continuous data. Continuous data ni bukan dalam bentuk kategori tapi dalam bentuk sebagai contoh markah. Berapa ramai yang dapat markah sekian-sekian markah, ya. Berapa ramai yang dapat sekian-sekian markah. Jadi sesuatu yang measurable lah, ya. Okey, jadi tu beza dia. Okey, histogram dia touch antara satu bar dengan bar lain, dia touch. Bar chart dia tidak touch, dia separate, ya. Dia antara satu sama lain. Okey, saya nak pergi pada yang seterusnya, iaitu analisis proses, ya. So analisis proses. Okey, so macam mana berlaku satu proses-proses yang tertentu, ya. Jadi proses ni kita boleh represent melalui inilah rajah analisis proses, ya. Okey, mungkin saya tengok ni. Okey, contoh macam ni, ya. Sampel dalam bahasa Inggerisnya flow chart, ya. So apa step dia? Start daripada yang pertama, yang kedua, yang ketiga, yang keempat, yang kelima, dan sampai pada peringkat yang akhir. Kalau kita pergi ke misalnya pendaftaran, jabatan pendaftaran, so macam mana kita nak buat kad pengenalan, macam mana nak renew. Jadi kita masuk tu, kita akan ikut dia punya flow chart. Flow chart kata yang pertama daftar dekat kaunter A misalnya. So kita pun pergi kaunter A. Lepas tu bila selesai situ pergi dekat kaunter B. Okey, lepas tu C dan sebagainya. So dalam situ adalah pilihan-pilihan dia. Kalau misalnya kalau misalnya tidak memenuhi apa yang dia nak, lepas tu ada alternatif dia, pergi pada kaunter lain dan sebagainya. Okey, so dengan cara ni untuk memudahkan kita lah supaya kita dapat idea apa langkah-langkah yang perlu kita lalui untuk menyelesaikan sesuatu urusan itu, ya. Okey, jadi itu maksud dia. Okey, jadi saya ingat saya tak bacalah yang ni, sebab dia bendanya begitu mudah sekali untuk kita memahaminya. Okey. Okey, so apa kaitan dia dengan kumpulan KIK? So bila kita analyse langkah-langkah, step-step yang perlu ada, kita boleh identify dekat langkah yang keberapa adanya masalah. Dari situ kita boleh identify. Alright, so langkah-langkah untuk menyediakan carta aliran kerja. So yang pertama, rujuk proses kerja. ya, seperti dalam deskripsi tugas. Yang keduanya, sediakan catat alur kerja terperinci. Dan yang ketiga, masukkan simbol-simbol aliran, ya. Jadi ni contoh flowchart yang ada. Jadi jadi ni kan. Okey ya. So ni apa yang kita lakukan bila kita nak pergi MACD dan sebagainya. Yang pertama, kita start, pas sampai dekat kaunter kita order burger. Okey, lepas tu kita nak fries ke tak? Kalau nak, order fries. Kalau tak nak, okey, pergi pula tanya drinks. Ya, nak drinks ke tak? Kalau nak, order drinks. Kalau tak nak, okey, kita terus bayar. So kira tu habis macam tu. So ni adalah contoh yang sangat-sangat mudah apa yang kita lakukan setiap hari. Jadi di pejabat macam mana nak tu di office, di organisasi kerja, macam mana kita nak melalui proses pengesahan jawatan. Jadi dia ada flowchart yang tertentu. Jadi kita akan melalui lah flowchart tu untuk melihat di mana kita berada dan apa yang perlu kita lakukan. Alright, jadi saya akan buka ni penerangan video.
In this video, we're talking all about flowcharts. We'll explore what a flowchart is, why we use them, flowchart symbols and best practices, and the different kinds of flowcharts that are used for various purposes. If you want to learn how to make a flowchart in SmartDraw, that's a separate video. Be sure to check that one out. So, a flowchart is a visual representation of the sequence of steps and decisions needed to perform a process. Each step in the sequence is noted with a diagram shape. Steps are linked by connecting lines and directional arrows. This allows anyone to view the flowchart and logically follow the process from beginning to end. A flowchart is a powerful business tool. With proper design and construction, it communicates the steps in a process very effectively and efficiently. You'll notice that a flowchart has different shapes or symbols. In this case, there are two symbols. Those with rounded ends represent the start and end points of the process, and rectangles are used to show the interim steps. There are dozens of symbols that can be used in a flowchart. If you're new to flowcharting, it's important to know what they represent before using them. The type of diagram dictates the flowchart symbols that are used. For example, a data flow diagram may contain an input-output symbol or an I/O symbol, but you wouldn't expect to see it in most process flow diagrams. Here is a more comprehensive library of flowchart symbols. Many of the flowchart symbols shown here are for use in very specific applications, such as a data flow diagram used for computer programming. Unless you have specialized knowledge and your diagram is being developed for a peer group with similar knowledge, it's best to stick with basic flowchart symbols. If more than the most basic flowchart symbols appear in your diagram, it is good practice to include a legend or symbol key. Most flowcharts can be built using only the start, end, and action or process symbols, as well as basic connecting lines and split paths to denote decision points. Sticking with these primary flowchart symbols is the best way to ensure that your diagram will be easy to understand. If you do need to get a little more complicated, it's important to be familiar with the variety of flowchart types. Some commonly used ones include swim lane flowcharts, which diagram a process from start to finish, but also divide these steps into categories, represented as rows or columns, to help distinguish which departments or employees are responsible for each set of actions. Data flow diagrams illustrate how data is processed by a system in terms of inputs and outputs. Its focus is on the flow of information, where data comes from, where it goes, and how it gets stored. Influence diagrams are compact graphical representations of a decision situation, often used with or in place of a decision tree to help teams analyze choices and decide on the next step. Workflow diagrams depict a series of actions that define a job or how work should be done. A workflow diagram visualizes how tasks will flow between resources, whether they're machines or people, and what conditions allow the sequence to move forward. Process flow diagrams, also known as flow sheets, are used by chemical and process engineers to illustrate general plant processes and the relationships between the equipment. Flowcharts are used in architecture, engineering, business, technology, education, science, medicine, government, among others, to visualize things like project planning, program or system design, process documentation, audits for inefficiencies or malfunctions, mapping of computer algorithms, and documenting workflow. Originally, flowcharts were created by hand using pencil and paper. Today's flowcharts are typically created using diagramming software, and SmartDraw happens to do a really good job with that. Once again, please check out our How to Make a Flowchart video to see how it's done in SmartDraw. That's the world of flowcharts in a nutshell. Thanks for watching.
Okay, saya harap itu clear. So tentang simbol-simbol nanti boleh Google lah. So ada misalnya diamond tu maksudnya pilihan. Arrow tu menunjukkan flow, ya. Okay, dan ada representation khas untuk start dan juga untuk the end. Jadi semua ada simbol-simbol yang tertentu.